Her kidneys shut down at 26. Jayne's car folded on the highway, and James Dean never made it past fourth gear. These are 18 brutal exits. Hollywood never wanted to explain. Some were accidents, others staged, but everyone left behind a trail of whispers. Jean Harlow, the Platinum Tragedy. They tried to bleach away in 1937 as MGM prepared another round of blockbusters. Their brightest blonde lay dying, her once glowing skin now waxy, her breath shallow, her beauty dimmed by something no camera could soften. Jean Harlow, Hollywood's original platinum blonde, was just 26, and she was slipping away. She had been the blueprint, not just for Monroe, but for every starlet who followed. With hair so pale it shimmered like frost under studio lights, and eyes that could shift from innocent to wicked in a single glance. Jean Harlow was the 1930s. Films like Red Dust and Dinner at 8 made her a household name, and her sex appeal was marketed like a product, because that's exactly what MGM had turned her into, a product. But that platinum hair, it didn't come without a cost. To maintain it, Jean endured a cocktail of bleach and ammonia, raw chemicals applied weekly to her scalp by force of contract. Her hair began falling out, her scalp blistered. Still, the cameras rolled. When clumps came out in the brush, wigs were quietly ordered. When she fainted on set, it was chalked up to dieting. But behind the scenes, the studio panicked. In early 1937, she collapsed while filming Saratoga. At first, the official story was influenza, then gallbladder trouble. But the truth couldn't be glossed over forever. Jean was dying of kidney failure, her body poisoned, piece by piece. Many believed the toxic treatments, forced on her by image-obsessed handlers, contributed to the collapse of her organs. But in classic studio fashion, MGM deflected blame. Her mother, a devout Christian Scientist, was scapegoated for refusing early treatment, while the studio quietly scrubbed its name from the narrative. As her condition worsened, co-workers wept off set. Clark Gable, her frequent co-star, sat beside her hospital bed, shattered. And when she passed, pale, bloated, unrecognizable, the funeral wasn't just a tragedy. It was a cover-up. MGM rushed to finish Saratoga with body doubles. They buried her beneath marble and makeup. But no veneer can hide what they did. Jean Harlow didn't die of natural causes. She died of a system that valued hair color over health, profit over people. And the worst part, they kept the cameras rolling until her final breath. James Dean, the rebel who died before the cause could begin. On a cool Friday evening in 1955, just before sunset turned the California sky to gold, James Dean slid into his silver Porsche Spyder and drove straight into legend. He was 24, brooding, beautiful, and burning too fast for the world to hold on to. To the public, Dean was a mystery in motion, with just 3 films, East of Eden, Rebel Without a Cause, and Giant. He carved himself into cinematic history, like initials on a school desk. There was something raw about him, something the polished stars of the studio system couldn't fake. He didn't act emotions, he wore them. Slouched shoulders, cigarette dangling, eyes that seemed to carry the weight of a life he hadn't lived yet. But off-screen, Dean fed that restlessness with speed. He raced bikes, fast cars, and time itself. His pride and joy was a silver Porsche 550 Spyder he named Little Bastard. Friends warned him. So did fellow actor Alec Guinness, who claimed the car gave him chills and told Dean, "If you get in that car, you'll be dead within a week." Dean just laughed. On September 30th, 1955, while en route to a race in Salinas, Dean and his mechanic took the back roads, hoping to break in the car. At an intersection near Cholam, another driver turned left across their lane. The impact crushed the low-slung Porsche like paper. Dean was pinned, his neck broken, his body mangled. He died before reaching the hospital. It was 5:59 p.m. His final film hadn't even been released. What followed only deepened the myth. Parts of Little Bastard were sold off and allegedly cursed. One tire burst, nearly killing a new driver. Another piece fell and injured a mechanic. The wreckage itself mysteriously vanished during transit, never to be found. Whether truth or legend, it added to the eerie sense that Dean's death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a warning. He became the forever young symbol of Hollywood's tortured artist, a rebel who never had time for the cause, a face frozen in time, looking back at a world that couldn't catch up. And maybe that's the cruelest part. James Dean didn't fade out. He ended mid-sentence, mid-scream, in the open road's final curve. Jayne Mansfield, the blonde bombshell with a death too grisly to forget. In 1967, under the dusky glow of a Louisiana highway, the scream queen of the silver screen was silenced, not with a whisper, but with a sound no one could ever forget. Jayne Mansfield, the woman often called Marilyn's rival, met a fate so gruesome it blurred the line between Hollywood fiction and horror. At her peak, Jayne was a walking spectacle, with curves that defied studio logic and charisma that begged for a camera lens. Films like The Girl Can't Help It and Promises. Promises weren't just box office hits. They were cultural provocations. Jayne played into the fantasy, the breathy voice, the platinum hair, the knowing wink. But off-screen, she was no ditz. Behind the bouffant was a savvy, multilingual woman who studied Shakespeare and negotiated her own contracts. And yet, like many women of that era, her intellect was lost in the fog of her figure. On the night of June 28, 1967, Jayne and her children were headed to New Orleans for a TV appearance. The air was thick with fog and bug spray from a nearby mosquito truck, cloaking the road in a lethal white curtain. Her Buick Electra, a boat of chrome and glamour, plowed into the rear of a slow-moving semi. The car slid under the truck's trailer like a knife into flesh. The crash was instantaneous. Jayne, along with her driver and companion, was killed on impact. Her 3 children in the back seat, including future actor Mariska Hargitay, miraculously survived. But the world was left with headlines far too vivid. Rumors swirled that she'd been decapitated. In truth, her skull was partially crushed, her wig flung meters from the car, mistaken for something worse. But the damage to her legacy had already been done. She became tabloid fodder, a punchline, a myth. Her death was more than tragic. It was cinematic in the worst way. A woman who lived her life as a caricature of desire, brought down not by scandal or excess, but by fog, steel, and speed. In the end, Jayne's legacy is a haunting one, not just of beauty lost, but of how Hollywood sells a dream until the dreamer becomes disposable. Marilyn Monroe, the blonde bombshell the world couldn't protect. On the night of August 4th, 1962, a light went out in Brentwood. Not a flicker, but a full collapse. Marilyn Monroe, the most photographed woman on Earth, was found lifeless in her modest Spanish-style home. The bedroom was dim, her phone dangling off the hook, and on the nightstand, a row of pill bottles. Too many, too neatly arranged. To the world, she was an icon, a symbol of sex, beauty, and innocence wrapped in satin. But behind the studio-approved smile, Norma Jean Mortensen had long been breaking under the weight of the image built around her. Raised in foster homes, haunted by absent parents and whispers of instability, Marilyn became Hollywood's golden child. But she was never allowed to be fragile. As the cameras loved her, the system used her. Studio bosses saw profit, not pain. Directors saw a doll, not a woman. And her lovers, some of them among the most powerful men in America, saw something even more dangerous, a liability. By 1962, Marilyn had burned too brightly for too long. Her body was exhausted, her emotions raw and untethered. She'd been in and out of treatments, rumored to be entangled with both John and Robert Kennedy. When she sang Happy Birthday to the president in that skin-tight dress, it wasn't just a performance. It was a turning point. So when news broke of her death, the official word came quickly: a probable overdose. Case closed. But for those who knew the industry's shadows, the questions didn't fade. Why were her medical records altered? Why was her house cleaned before police arrived? Why did neighbors report seeing a mysterious ambulance hours before her body was officially found? Some say she was silenced, that her secrets had become too heavy for the men around her. Others believe she simply couldn't carry her sorrow any longer. But what remains undeniable is how carefully the truth was wrapped up, smoothed over, and sold back to the public. Marilyn died alone, beneath a sheet, with the world still wanting more. She spent her life being watched, but in the end, no one truly saw her. And maybe that's the most haunting part. Hollywood gave her a stage, but never gave her safety. She was the candle everyone adored until the flame got too close. Thelma Todd, Hollywood's laughing beauty, silenced in a garage. On the morning of December 16, 1935, in the crisp stillness of a California winter, Thelma Todd was found slumped in the front seat of her car, parked in a closed garage on a hill above the Pacific. She was dressed for an evening out, wrapped in fur, lips still painted, but her lungs were filled with carbon monoxide, and her future had vanished with her final breath. They called her the Ice Cream Blonde, a comedic darling of the early talkies. With piercing eyes and impeccable timing, she starred alongside Laurel and Hardy, Buster Keaton, and the Marx Brothers. But unlike the ditzy roles she played, Thelma was sharp, business-minded, and ambitious. At just 29, she wasn't just starring in films, she was running a successful cafe overlooking the Santa Monica coast. That cafe, Thelma Todd's Sidewalk Cafe, became the talk of Hollywood. But it wasn't just the pancakes that brought in the power players. The club's late-night scene, glittering with stars and underworld figures, drew attention from people with darker interests. One of them was her business partner, Roland West. Another, more chillingly, was alleged mob boss Lucky Luciano. Luciano reportedly wanted to use the cafe's second floor for gambling. Thelma refused. Tensions simmered. In the days leading up to her death, friends said she looked worried, distracted, and then, just hours after attending a party at the Trocadero, she vanished. Her body was discovered 2 days later, locked inside her own garage, just steps from West's home. The official ruling? Accidental death. She had, they said, simply chosen the wrong place to sleep off the night. But the autopsy told a murkier story. A bloodied lip, bruises, no clear signs of struggle, but far too many unanswered questions. The rumors haven't stopped since. Did she stumble into that garage on her own? Or was she placed there, carefully, deliberately? The scene staged for convenience. Some believe Luciano had her silenced. Others point to West, with whom she'd had a strained relationship. What's clear is that no one in power seemed interested in digging too deeply. Thelma Todd was a woman who made people laugh for a living, and may have died for saying no to the wrong man. In Hollywood, the silence around her death has lasted longer than her films, and that may be the darkest punchline of all. Peg Entwistle, the girl who fell from a dream. In 1932, long before the Hollywood sign became a selfie spot, it was a towering billboard for hope and for one starlet, a tragic stage exit. Peg Entwistle was just 24 when she climbed the ladder to the top of the giant H, looked out at the city that had promised her everything, and vanished into legend. Born in Wales and raised in New York, Peg was no amateur. She trained on Broadway, sharing the stage with legends like Humphrey Bogart. Her performances were poised, her future promising. But like so many before her, Peg believed the road to true stardom led west. She traded theater lights for the blinding glare of Hollywood, a place where dreams move fast and vanish faster. She landed a contract with RKO, even filmed a role in 13 Women, a psychological thriller starring Irene Dunne. but the studio cut most of her scenes before release. Her name barely made the credits. The reviews came in, and Peg didn't see her name once. Just like that, she went from up-and-coming to invisible. On the night of September 16th, she slipped away from her uncle's home in Beechwood Canyon. The wind was cool, the sky sharp with stars. No one noticed the slim figure hiking toward the hills, or the way she paused at the base of the Hollywood sign. She used a workman's ladder to climb to the top of the H, and from there, silence. Her body was found 2 days later by a hiker, but it was the letter left behind that haunted people. In it, she wrote, "I am afraid I am a coward. I am sorry for everything. If I had done this a long time ago, it would have saved a lot of pain." And then, the cruelest twist of all. Days after her death, a letter arrived at her uncle's home. It was from the studio. Peg had been offered a lead role, a part where her character, fittingly, would play a young woman who dies by leaping from a height. To this day, people say her spirit lingers near that sign. But the real ghost is in the story of a girl who gave everything to the Dream Factory and was chewed up before she ever got her name in lights. Peg didn't just fall from the H, she fell from Hollywood itself. Carole Lombard, the screwball queen, who went down a patriot. In January 1942, just weeks after Pearl Harbor, America was bracing for war, and Hollywood was called to serve in its own way. Carole Lombard, the silver screen's brightest spark, had just raised over $2 million in war bonds. She was glamorous, fast-talking, and magnetic, the queen of screwball comedies, known for lighting up rooms with one smirk. But on her flight home from that Indiana rally, she never made it back to Los Angeles. Her death came not on a film set, but in flames, on the side of a Nevada mountain. Carole had always been more than just another pretty face in soft focus. She was whip-smart, politically sharp, and married to Clark Gable, the undisputed king of Hollywood. Together, they were the industry's royal couple. But while Gable played heroes on screen, Lombard lived like one off of it. She refused to be sidelined during the war effort, volunteering for rallies and speaking engagements while other stars played it safe behind studio gates. On January 15th, Carole boarded TWA Flight 3 with her mother and MGM's press agent. They were returning from Indianapolis, where she'd sold defense bonds with the kind of wit and charm that could make a banker blush. The flight made a stop in Las Vegas. It was supposed to be routine, but after takeoff, the plane veered off course, whether due to a navigation error or equipment failure. No one knows for certain. Minutes later, it slammed into the jagged cliffs of Potosi Mountain. There were no survivors. The crash site was so remote that it took hours to reach the wreckage. The headlines were immediate, the grief overwhelming. Clark Gable was reportedly inconsolable. He joined the U.S. Army Air Forces shortly after. Some say to distract himself, others say to honor her. And then came the haunting irony. Just before leaving Indianapolis, Carole had insisted on flying instead of taking the train, reportedly telling friends, "If it's my time to go, then I'm ready." The world never got to see her grow old on screen. No slow fade, no farewell tour. Just a final act written in the stars and carved into rock. Carole Lombard didn't go quietly. She went out doing what mattered, but the silence she left behind still echoes through the canyon. Lupe Vélez, the Mexican Spitfire, who died alone, dressed for the spotlight. In 1944, with the world at war and Hollywood draped in patriotic gloss, Lupe Vélez slipped quietly out of life, wearing silk pajamas, her hair perfectly curled and her makeup untouched. She had been a firework in a town of flickering lights, but when the final spark faded, the industry barely looked back. Lupe wasn't just a star. She was a storm. One of the first Mexican actresses to break into mainstream Hollywood, she lit up screens in the late 1920s and 30s with electric charisma. Her fiery roles in the Mexican Spitfire series weren't fiction. They were echoes of her real-life defiance. She was outspoken, passionate, and unfiltered in a town that prized obedience over personality. And for a while, the town adored her for it. But the spotlight doesn't always love you back. Off-screen, Lupe's life was messy, unpredictable. She navigated a string of high-profile romances, including a turbulent relationship with Gary Cooper, and clashed with studios that tried to mold her into a softer, quieter version of herself. By 1944, her star was fading. Roles dried up. Tabloids twisted her every word. And just when she thought she might be ready for a fresh start, she discovered she was pregnant, reportedly by an aspiring Austrian actor who wanted nothing to do with the child. That December, Lupe hosted a dinner at her Beverly Hills home. The table was set, candles lit. Friends remembered her as radiant, laughing one moment, then strangely still the next. That night, after guests had gone, she retired to her bedroom, put on her finest nightgown, arranged roses by the mirror, and took what many believe was a fatal mix of pills. The next morning, she was found lifeless, still in full makeup. Her body posed like a final scene. Yet even in death, the press treated her like a caricature. False rumors spread, mocking, outlandish stories about her final hours that turned her tragedy into a punchline. But Lupe was never a joke. She was a woman who broke barriers, played by her own rules, and refused to shrink herself for comfort. In the end, she died the way she lived, unapologetically dramatic, entirely alone, and dressed for a moment that Hollywood was too blind to honor. Frances Farmer, the starlet, Hollywood tried to silence. In 1942, Frances Farmer was on the verge of everything: beauty, acclaim, and a film career that should have lasted decades. But instead of walking red carpets, she would soon be locked behind hospital walls, forgotten by the town that once promised her the world. Frances wasn't like the others. While most actresses played along, Frances asked questions, and worse, gave honest answers. She spoke openly about her discomfort with fame, her frustrations with the studio system, and the cage it built around women like her. In interviews, she dismissed the superficial glamour, once calling the industry a cheap carnival. And for that, they branded her difficult. By the early 40s, her name had started to vanish from movie posters. Rumors swirled of erratic behavior and missed rehearsals. But few knew what was really happening behind the scenes. She was struggling, not with ego or arrogance, but with what many now believe was clinical depression. Instead of compassion, she was met with contracts torn up, film offers rescinded, and whispers that she'd gone mad. Then came the arrests, for public outbursts, for defying court orders. One judge ordered her to undergo psychiatric treatment. What followed wasn't healing, it was punishment. Over the next 7 years, Frances was shuffled between institutions, some little better than prisons. She was reportedly beaten, restrained, and subjected to treatments that would be condemned today. And then, the darkest rumor of all, that at some point during her institutionalization, she was lobotomized. The studios denied it, the doctors denied it. But something in her changed. When she re-emerged in the late 1950s, her fire was dimmed. Her once electric presence now flickered with caution. Though she attempted a comeback, in small television roles and stage appearances, the magic had been stripped down to survival. Frances Farmer died in 1970 from cancer. Her final years lived in quiet obscurity. She never got the apology, never got the truth acknowledged. They called her unstable. But what Frances needed was support, not silence, not sedation, not a scalpel to the soul. In the end, her story wasn't just about a woman undone by illness. It was about a system that couldn't stand a woman who saw it for what it really was. George Reeves, the Superman who couldn't be saved. In the early 1950s, every child in America knew his name. George Reeves, tall, broad-shouldered, with a jaw carved from granite, was Superman. But behind the cape, in the quiet corners of his life, Reeves was unraveling, and by 1959, he was gone. found dead from a gunshot wound in his own bedroom, a mystery that still casts a long shadow over Hollywood. He had started his career with promise, appearing in Gone with the Wind and a handful of respectable films. But it was television that made him a household name. The Adventures of Superman turned him into a living icon, adored by children, hounded by the public, and forever trapped in a role he couldn't escape. Off-screen, Reeves was a man haunted by contradictions. He wanted to be taken seriously, to move beyond the cape and tights. But casting directors saw only one thing: Superman. The work dried up. The phone stopped ringing, and soon, the once proud figure on Saturday morning screens was left pacing his Benedict Canyon home, wondering if he'd been forgotten, or worse, replaced. Then came the whispers, a relationship with Toni Mannix, the wife of MGM fixer Eddie Mannix, a man with powerful friends and a reputation for keeping secrets buried. Their affair was passionate, but complicated. When Reeves broke it off and became engaged to a younger woman, the tension reportedly escalated. Some say Reeves had become paranoid. Others say he was being watched. On June 16, 1959, George Reeves was found dead from a gunshot wound to the head. The official ruling? A self-inflicted gunshot. But friends who were with him that night told conflicting stories. No fingerprints on the weapon. No gunpowder residue on his hands. And curiously, multiple guests claimed to hear the shot, but didn't call the police for nearly an hour. The case was quickly closed, but the questions have never stopped. Was it a moment of despair from a man who couldn't escape the shadow of his own character? Or was something or someone silencing him for reasons far more sinister? George Reeves died the way he lived, wearing a mask. And the most tragic part? Even now, we're still trying to separate the man from the myth. In the end, not even Superman could save himself. Ramon Novarro, the matinee idol. Beaten behind closed doors. In the silent era of Hollywood, few faces drew more breathless sighs than Ramon Novarro. With smoldering eyes, chiseled features, and a mysterious charm, he was billed as the next Valentino. And for a time he lived up to the name. But decades later, on Halloween night in 1968, his body was found bruised, bloodied, and surrounded by broken glass. The golden boy of yesteryear had died not in a glamorous scandal, but in a grim, lonely crime. Born José Ramón Gil Samaniego in Mexico, Novarro rose to fame in the 1920s. With hits like Ben-Hur, A Tale of the Christ. He brought a quiet depth to the screen that didn't need dialogue to stir hearts. But when sound entered the picture, his accent, once romantic in silence, suddenly became a studio liability. His leading roles faded, offers slowed, and Hollywood, as it often does, moved on. Behind the public grace, Novarro carried a private burden. In a time when honesty could cost a career, he kept his personal life carefully guarded. He was discreet, solitary, and generous with his wealth, especially to those in need. But that generosity would one day be weaponized against him. On October 30th, 1968, Novarro invited two brothers to his Los Feliz home. Strangers, barely out of their teens. What unfolded inside those Spanish-style walls remains one of the most brutal crimes in Hollywood lore. The official report claimed robbery. They believed he was hiding cash. They beat him with a metal cane, tortured him, then left him to die, choking, not from the blows, but from his own blood. He was discovered the next day, slumped in bed, his once handsome face unrecognizable. The irony was crushing. A man who made his name playing noble heroes on ancient battlefields had been slain in his own bedroom for a few dollars that didn't even exist. The press, of course, leaned into the spectacle, but those who truly knew Novarro remembered a man who never chased the spotlight, even when it tried to chase him away. His death wasn't just violent, it was cruel, calculated, and undeserved. Ramon Novarro didn't fade. He was taken, and in the quiet that followed, all that remained was the echo of a generation's forgotten idol. and the shadow of a city that never protects its own. Barbara Payton, the starlet who died in the shadows of her own fame. In 1950, Barbara Payton's name lit up marquees and gossip columns alike. She was blonde, bold, and on the verge of stardom. A studio darling with a face that seemed sculpted for Technicolor. But just 13 years later, she would be found in a dingy LA apartment. Broke, bloated, and nearly unrecognizable. Hollywood had promised her everything. Then it chewed her up and walked away. Barbara's rise was meteoric. She landed roles opposite Gary Cooper, Gregory Peck, and James Cagney. Her on-screen presence was electric, sensual, confident, and dangerously alive. But behind the glamour, she was spiraling. She fell hard for Tom Neal, a B-movie actor with a volatile temper. Their relationship became infamous, not for romance, but for the bruises and headlines. Neal once beat her then-fiancé, Franchot Tone, so badly that Tone was hospitalized with a shattered cheekbone and brain injuries. The scandal cost all three dearly. After the studios turned their backs, Barbara's personal demons took over. She couldn't stay sober. Jobs dried up. The lavish lifestyle faded into pawned jewelry and evictions. By the late 1950s, she had gone from red carpet premieres to motel lobbies and low-end bars, reportedly selling herself just to cover rent and her next drink. In 1963, Barbara was living with her parents in San Diego. Her health was crumbling. Years of hard living had ravaged her once dazzling looks. She wrote a raw, unfiltered autobiography called I Am Not Ashamed, detailing her fall with heartbreaking honesty. But even then, the world didn't look twice. She died at just 39, from heart and liver failure. There was no grand Hollywood send-off, no headlines, just a quiet burial and the echo of what could have been. Barbara Payton didn't vanish overnight. She was erased, one humiliation at a time. A cautionary tale wrapped in silk, then discarded in silence. And yet, through the fog of scandal and self-destruction, one truth remains. She was more than her mistakes. She was a woman broken not by one choice, but by an industry that demands perfection and then punishes those who crack under its weight. Her final scene wasn't filmed, but it lingers like the last breath of a forgotten song. Sharon Tate, a star on the rise, silenced by madness. In the summer of 1969, Sharon Tate was on the cusp of everything. A rising star, a new wife, 8 months pregnant with her first child. The kind of soft-glow Hollywood fairy tale that seemed almost too perfect. And then, in one night, that image was shattered beyond recognition. Sharon wasn't just another pretty face. She had a subtle, magnetic quality on screen, delicate, witty, and disarmingly modern. Films like Valley of the Dolls hinted at a long career ahead, but she never got the chance to prove what she could become. Married to acclaimed director Roman Polanski, their circle included artists, musicians, and thinkers, the vanguard of a new, more liberated Hollywood. It was a time of barefoot glamour and whispered revolutions. But under all that flower child haze, something darker was brewing just beyond the city lights. On August 8, 1969, Sharon hosted a quiet night at her Cielo Drive home, a cool canyon-side estate tucked above Beverly Hills. Inside were close friends: celebrity hairstylist Jay Sebring, aspiring screenwriter Wojciech Frykowski, and coffee heiress Abigail Folger. They talked, they laughed, they waited for the baby's arrival. Then came the knock. The killers, followers of a man named Charles Manson, entered without warning. What happened next was so brutal, so senseless, that the world struggled to understand it. Sharon, pleading for the life of her unborn child, was met with nothing but silence and cruelty. By dawn, 5 people were dead, and the dream of 1960s Hollywood, free-spirited, idealistic, untouchable, had died with them. News of the murders didn't just shake the industry, it stopped time. It was as if the entire city had looked in the mirror and seen something it couldn't ignore, something feral, behind the fame. For many, Sharon became a symbol of innocence lost, of vulnerability beneath glamour, of a world where beauty and joy could be extinguished in a single night. There were no final lines for Sharon Tate, no graceful exit, no resolution, just a broken promise, left hanging in the still canyon air. Her legacy is not just one of tragedy. It's a reminder that even in a town of illusions, some nightmares are all too real, and some stars, no matter how briefly they shine, never truly fade. Judy Garland, the girl they made shine until she burned out. She sang about rainbows, but Judy Garland lived under clouds, heavy, constant, and cruelly lit by studio spotlights. From the moment she stepped onto the MGM lot as a teenager, Judy wasn't treated like a girl. She was a product, shaped, trimmed, and sculpted for maximum profit. Her cheeks were pinched to keep them round, her meals rationed, her sleep medicated. Executives decided when she could rest, what she could eat, and how long she had to smile. Her body became a battleground between contracts and exhaustion. The Wizard of Oz may have turned her into an icon overnight, but behind that Technicolor glow, Judy was being worn down. To keep her energy high during grueling shoots, she was allegedly fed a steady regimen of pep pills by studio doctors, followed by sedatives to make her sleep when the cameras finally stopped. It wasn't treatment. It was control, disguised as care. She grew up in a world where applause drowned out cries for help. By her 20s, she was already buckling under the weight of fame and expectation. Every comeback was met with whispers about her instability, yet few paused to ask what decades of manipulation had done to her. The truth? Judy Garland wasn't weak. She was exhausted. Not just from the roles, the tours, the late nights, but from the never-ending demand that she be everyone's idea of perfect. In June 1969, at just 47, Judy died in a small London apartment. Officially, it was labeled a tragic miscalculation, a fatal mix of pills taken in a moment of deep fatigue. But it wasn't just the medicine that failed her. It was the industry that gave her everything but rest. The image of Dorothy clicking her heels and dreaming of home still lingers in our minds. But Judy never really found hers. She searched for it in applause, in marriage, in a final concert, but the road was long, winding, and lonely. Judy Garland didn't fade. She was burned at both ends, lit by the very hands that claimed to love her. And when the glow finally dimmed, the world didn't just lose a star. It lost a soul that was never allowed to just be. Because sometimes the real tragedy isn't the fall. It's how hard someone had to fight just to stay standing. Natalie Wood, the star who vanished beneath the waves. She was Hollywood royalty, a child actress who grew into a luminous leading lady, shimmering on screen in West Side Story and Rebel Without a Cause. But in 1981, Natalie Wood's life ended not on a set, but floating face down in the waters off Catalina Island. She was 43, and the mystery of how she got there still haunts Hollywood like a chill that never quite lifts. It was supposed to be a romantic getaway. Natalie, her husband Robert Wagner, and fellow actor Christopher Walken had boarded their yacht, the Splendor, for a weekend at sea. But something went wrong that night. Arguments were heard, alcohol flowed, and at some point in the darkness, Natalie disappeared, only to be found hours later, lifeless in a nightgown, drifting in the current. The official explanation, accidental drowning. But from the start, the details felt off. There was a dinghy missing, later found adrift. There were bruises on her body, and conflicting stories from those on board. Wagner claimed she must have slipped while trying to secure the dinghy, but the captain, Dennis Duvern, would later allege there had been a violent fight, that Wagner, in his words, didn't do enough. Natalie had always feared deep water. She once told friends it terrified her, that she could barely swim. The idea that she would wander out, alone, at night, in the dark, felt impossible to those who knew her. The more time passed, the deeper the unease grew. In 2011, the case was reopened. The coroner quietly revised her cause of death from accidental to undetermined. Wagner was officially named a person of interest, but no charges were ever filed, and the whispers still linger like fog over the harbor. What makes Natalie's story so chilling isn't just the unanswered questions. It's the way her light was dimmed in silence. One moment she was dancing through Technicolor musicals, the next, gone without a scream. In the end, Natalie Wood didn't just vanish into the ocean, she vanished into legend. A woman who spent her life surrounded by cameras, yet whose final moments remain just out of frame. Bela Lugosi. Dracula's curse was never just a role. In 1931, he stared into the camera with a piercing gaze and spoke just 3 words, "I am Dracula." And from that moment on, Bela Lugosi was immortal, or so the world believed. But off-screen, there was no cape, no castle, no escape, only a man aging in the shadows of a legend that refused to let him grow old. Hungarian-born and classically trained, Lugosi arrived in Hollywood with talent to spare, and an accent that became both his signature and his cage. After his chilling performance as the Count, he was forever typecast, trapped in the gothic fog of horror roles, while his contemporaries climbed toward Oscars and bigger paychecks. Offers grew fewer, the budgets shrank, and still, the public demanded he play the monster. Behind the scenes, Lugosi was reportedly battling chronic pain, the kind that eats at you day after day until sleep feels like a stranger. Desperate for relief, he turned to prescriptions that promised rest, but the temporary calm came at a cost. As his roles dried up, so did his finances. By the 1950s, the man who once captivated the world was living in a small Los Angeles apartment, relying on help from friends and the occasional B-movie cameo to keep the lights on. He worked with Ed Wood in those final years, low-budget projects shot in haste, where Lugosi's regal presence stood in tragic contrast to the flimsy sets. But Wood admired him, and to Lugosi, even the smallest spotlight was better than none. In 1955, Bela Lugosi made headlines again, not for a role, but for checking himself into a hospital. He wanted help, and in a rare moment of public vulnerability, he spoke openly about his struggles, saying, "I'm on the road to recovery." But that road ended too soon. In 1956, he passed away of a heart attack, alone and nearly broke, buried in the Dracula cape he made famous, as if the world refused to remember him any other way. His story is a cautionary tale of Hollywood's short memory, how fame can seduce, trap, and abandon. Bela Lugosi wasn't a vampire. He was a man who gave everything to his art, and found that the role that made him would also consume him. Paul Bern, the MGM powerhouse who knew too much. On September 5, 1932, inside a Spanish-style mansion in Beverly Hills, a man lay slumped near his bedroom mirror. A revolver rested nearby. A note sat neatly folded, and by sunrise, the studio had already sent someone to clean up. That man was Paul Bern, a top MGM executive, husband to Jean Harlow, and one of the most quietly influential figures in early Hollywood. To the public, he was a reserved genius. To insiders, he was the man who shaped scripts behind closed doors and knew where the bodies were metaphorically buried. But after his death, with headlines screaming "suicide," Hollywood insiders whispered something else. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was a message. Just 2 months earlier, Bern had married Jean Harlow, the radiant platinum blonde, who was fast becoming the studio's biggest asset. Their wedding had been sudden, almost strategic. Some said it was love. Others said it was leverage. Harlow, beneath the glamour, had begun asking questions about contracts, about her health, about her own failing body. By 1932, she was already complaining of fatigue and sharp pain. Some claim Bern was the only one who listened, that he tried to intervene, that he knew the harsh bleaching routines. forced by the studio to preserve her marketability, were destroying her from the inside out. And then, suddenly, he was dead. The note they claimed was his read more like a bad script. Last night was only a comedy, but no one could explain the bruising on his body, or why his valet arrived to find the scene already touched, or why MGM executives got there before the police. Whispers began to circulate of a mysterious ex-girlfriend, of blackmail, of secrets that might have reached the top floors of the studio tower. Some say the scene was staged, that Bern didn't take his own life, that he was silenced, and that Jean Harlow, already fading, never truly recovered from that morning. She would be dead just 5 years later. Another young star buried under a marble crypt and a cloud of studio lies. If Paul Bern was a casualty, he wasn't the first, and he certainly wasn't the last. In a town built on illusion, truth is often the first thing to vanish, right before the lights go out. William Desmond Taylor, the director who knew too much. He was found face-up in his Los Angeles bungalow, still in his tailored suit, like he had just stepped away from a set. But this wasn't fiction. It was one of Hollywood's earliest and eeriest scandals. William Desmond Taylor, respected director and hidden enigma, was dead, shot once in the back, and no one, to this day, has been held responsible. In February 1922, the Taylor case shattered the illusion that Hollywood's golden age was built on innocence. Taylor wasn't just another filmmaker. He had directed over 60 silent films, worked with stars like Mary Miles Minter, and carried an air of sophistication that set him apart. But the more the police looked, the less they found, and the more the press ran wild. Inside his home, they found love letters, one from a young actress infatuated with him, another from a woman allegedly scorned. The rumors began swirling like cigarette smoke in a studio lot. Affairs, jealous rivals, studio cover-ups. Some even whispered that Taylor wasn't who he claimed to be, that he had abandoned a family years earlier under a different name. The narrative was irresistible. A gentleman director with secrets, and the suspects. There were plenty. His former valet, who disappeared the day of the murder. The actress whose love letters were found and whose mother was allegedly overprotective. Even studio executives were quietly suspected of staging a cleanup at the scene, trying to scrub Hollywood's reputation before the public could read it in black and white. The fallout was massive. Studios panicked. Morality watchdogs demanded censorship. Stars started traveling with bodyguards, and trust within the industry began to rot. The Taylor murder wasn't just about one man. It cracked the glittering surface of Tinseltown and revealed the chaos underneath. More than a century later, the case remains unsolved. No charges, no justice, just silence and shadows. William Desmond Taylor was a man who directed stories for a living, but in death, his own became one of the industry's darkest. And perhaps the most haunting part? In a town built on illusion, it's not surprising that one of its oldest ghosts still refuses to be explained. Some left in silence, others in screams, but all of them forgotten, misremembered, rewritten. These weren't just stars, they were people. And in the end, Hollywood wrote their final lines for them. If any of their stories moved you, speak their names in the comments. Like, share, and subscribe, so they're never erased again. The spotlight may have faded, but we can still keep them alive.